Everyone agrees gumbo is Louisiana's dish. French roux, Cajun spice, a pot of pure New Orleans pride. The most famous origin story for gumbo, the one printed in cookbooks, repeated by tour guides, carved into the state's culinary identity, centers on a group of French housewives who supposedly banged pots outside a colonial governor's mansion in 1722. Today, from the history books of foods, I bring for you the history of gumbo. This centuries-old dish, how it survived until modern world. Let's explore together. The pot they never let you look into. The pot they never let you look into. Because the word gumbo isn't French, it isn't Spanish. It comes from a language spoken by the very people that legend leaves out of the room entirely. And once you know that, you can't unsee who got written out of their own dish. Let's start with the myth, because the myth has a name attached to it. Jean-Baptiste Lemoine de Bienville. Bienville founded New Orleans in 1718. He was the colony's governor, and according to a story historians called the Petticoat Insurrection, sometimes the Frying Pan Revolt, a mob of French colonial wives showed up outside his house in 1722. They were furious. The food available to them in the new colony was strange, and they wanted something familiar. Bienville, the story goes, didn't deal with them himself. He handed the problem to his housekeeper. That housekeeper had learned something from the Choctaw people nearby, how to cook with local ingredients like filé, ground from sassafras leaves. The French women supposedly took that lesson and folded it into stews they'd already been taught by enslaved cooks of West African descent. Sit with that for a second. In the story colonial Louisiana loved to tell about itself, the invention belongs to the French housewives. The Choctaw contribution is a lesson learned. The African contribution isn't even named. It's just stews they'd already learned. Here's the twist. There is no official documentation that the Petticoat Insurrection ever happened, not one primary source. It shows up in tourism pamphlets and cookbook introductions, not colonial records. So the origin story of gumbo may be fiction, but the erasure inside that fiction, that part is very real. And it goes back further than 1722. If gumbo were really a French invention with a Native American assist, it would have a French name. It doesn't. Linguists trace gumbo to ngombo, a word for okra in Bantu languages spoken across West Africa and Central Africa. Some sources render it kingombo or ochingombo. Different spellings, same root. And this isn't a fringe theory, it's the most widely accepted etymology among food historians. Okra wasn't a minor ingredient here. It was the original thickener, before roux, before filé ever entered the pot. And okra didn't wander into Louisiana on its own. Historians have documented something haunting about how it got there. Enslaved women braided okra seeds into their children's hair before being forced onto ships. A hidden inheritance smuggled across an ocean in case there was nothing else to carry to the other side. So, before gumbo had a French governor's name attached to its legend, it had an African name attached to its literal ingredients. The dish is named after what enslaved people brought, not what colonists added. And if the name comes from West Africa, ask yourself, why does almost every popular version of this story starts in a Frenchman's kitchen? Now here's where it gets worse, because gumbo doesn't just erase one group, it erases two, and it plays them against each other while doing it. Remember the Choctaw housekeeper from the myth, unnamed of course. Filé powder, ground sassafras leaves, is a direct contribution of Choctaw culinary knowledge. It's not a footnote, it's one of gumbo's two defining thickeners, the other being okra. Two indigenous and African innovations doing the technical work that makes gumbo, gumbo. And in the popular telling, both get folded into a story about resourceful French women. This is what erasure usually looks like in food history. It's rarely a lie stated outright. It's a story that quietly moves the credit upward, from the people who actually held the knowledge to the people who happened to own the kitchen or the colony or the cookbook press. We don't have most of these cooks' names. Colonial Louisiana didn't record the names of enslaved people who ran plantation and townhouse kitchens with the same care it recorded the names of the families who ate their food. That's not a gap in the history. That's the history. Historian Kelly Fanto Dietz has spent years documenting exactly this pattern, tracing enslaved cooks at plantations including Thomas Jefferson's Monticello and George Washington's Mount Vernon. Cooks who built labor-intensive, technically demanding dishes, gumbo among them, while their owners took the credit in the historical record. We know the pattern, we know the mechanism. What we don't have, in most cases, is the name. And that absence isn't neutral, it's its own kind of theft. By the 1840s, this erasure stopped being passive, it became enforced. Picture Sunday afternoon in New Orleans. For enslaved and free black residents, it was the one day of the week they were legally allowed to gather. Congo Square, on the edge of the old French Quarter, became the center of it. Music, dance, trade, food. Gumbo pots simmering in public, in black hands, cooked black ways. The city didn't leave this alone. Assemblies were restricted by ordinance as early as 1817, confined to Congo Square under police supervision. In 1835, the Sunday gatherings were shut down outright. And according to newspaper accounts from the period, when police broke up unauthorized gatherings elsewhere in the city, the disruption was physical. Pots of gumbo were overturned, instruments were smashed, people were taken into custody and handed back to the people who legally owned them, and if a fine wasn't paid, a whipping followed. Meanwhile, in that same decade, white-run newspapers in New Orleans were running advertisements and features celebrating okra and gumbo as a regional delicacy for white readers in white kitchens. Read that again. The same decade, the same dish, confiscated and punished in the hands of the people who built it, advertised and celebrated in the hands of the people who didn't. That's not two separate stories about gumbo. That's one story about what happens when the people who create a culture are denied ownership of it, even while everyone around them is still eating it. Fast forward, gumbo is now one of the most recognizable dishes to come out of the American South. It's on Senate cafeteria menus. It's shorthand for Louisiana identity in tourism campaigns worldwide. And the fight over who gets to define it hasn't ended. It's just changed shape. Walk through New Orleans today and you'll find gumbo sold as an emblem of Cajun and Creole heritage broadly, in restaurants and cookbooks that rarely lead the dish's African name origin or its Choctaw thickening technique. The okra, the filé, the labor, folded quietly into a regional identity that isn't always credited to the specific people who built it. This isn't a call to say no one else can cook or love gumbo. It's the opposite point, actually. The dish was always built from multiple traditions in contact with each other. That was never the problem. The problem is which traditions get named on the menu and which ones just get tasted. Modern black chefs and food historians have been pushing back on exactly this, arguing publicly that the technical foundations of American Southern cooking were built by enslaved cooks whose names didn't survive, while the credit historically defaulted to the households that employed them. So when you order gumbo tonight or watch someone make it, understand what's actually in the bowl. It's not just okra, roux, and stock. It's a 5-century argument about who gets remembered for building a culture, still unresolved, still simmering. So go back to where we started. The everyone story is French housewives, a fed-up governor, a happy colonial accident. Flip it. The real story is enslaved West African cooks who carried okra seeds braided into their children's hair across an ocean. It's Choctaw knowledge that gave the dish its second thickener. It's a word, gumbo, that was never French to begin with because it was never a French invention to begin with. Bienville didn't give this dish its name. The people history refused to name did. Gumbo isn't Louisiana's melting pot story. It's Louisiana's unpaid invoice, and every bowl of it is still being served before that bill has ever been settled. See you all in the next video. Bye.